Hello everyone, welcome back to our course PSY101, Introduction to Psychology. So earlier we discussed about the um, concept of motivation, no? And for this video lecture, we're going to discuss about the emotions. So when we're talking about emotions, no, sometimes we tend to ask ourselves, no, or ask our the other people, no, of how do you feel and react on certain situations. So of course, here comes the difference between the feelings and emotions, because feelings are how we interpret, no, how we feel because of the stimulus, and next, the emotions are the reactions to how we feel. So now, let's define first what is emotion. So when we say emotion, it is often defined as the complex internal state that results in physical and psychological changes, and that influence thought and behavior. So these are the very complex, no, internal state, no, and again, it really affects, or it results to changes, no, or maybe changes in physical and psychological aspects, and it influences the thought and behavior. And it is a complex psychological state that involves three distinct components, and these are a subjective experience, a physiological response, and a behavioral or expressive response. So, and that is according to Hackenberry in 2007. And according to David Mayers, emotions involve physiological arousal, expressive behaviors, and conscious experience. So, in this aspect, we somehow define how emotions should be, and these are according to different references. So, to point out, in 1972, psychologist Paul Ekman suggested that there are 6 basic emotions, and these are fear, disgust, anger, surprise, happiness, and sadness. However, a few years later, he expanded this list to include embarrassment, excitement, contempt, shame, pride, satisfaction, and amusement. Okay? So again, it roots with the feelings, and emotions are the physical reactions, no? And there are interpretations which are psychological here in this point of discussion. So in 1980, Robert Plutchik introduced his own system of classifying emotions. So kaya doon pumasok si wheel of emotions, no? And the combination of 2 primary emotions will be another emotion. So as you can see here, you can look at the wheel of emotions here in our slide. You may review it. So his point here, no, or the point here of having this components of emotions, such as emotion as subjective experience, and emotion as physiological response, and emotion as behavioral response, we're going to discuss this one by one. So for emotion as subjective experience, no, even there are a number of experts believe that there are basic universal emotions experienced across race, age, and culture. There are also who believe that the experience of emotion can be highly subjective, of course, because the experience of emotion are different from one person to the other. It might be different level of my happiness to your own concept of happiness, and the way the person experiences emotions are not the same with others, of course. And consider the intensity, the purity, and feeling and sensation. That's why sometimes even in the different aspects, especially the slice of life of in the different movies, so discussing about the emotions, they are somehow considering the intensity and the purity, of course the intention and genuinity. So also the emotions should be considered in a different aspect as subjective experience due to the feeling and sensation, which is different from one to the other. Okay. Also, in the point of emotion as a physiological response, no, sympathetic nervous system's response in controls of the body, fight or flight. That's why if you asked before, no, about the fight or flight, of course that is a normal reaction of the person in a situation. That's why the sympathetic nervous system is actually responsible for it, and this will result to the sweating, of course. And these are in the different parts of the body, such as palms, face, back, feet, and etc. Especially the private parts of your body. And sometimes, no, stomach ache. That's why sometimes akala mo butterflies in your belly. Actually, hindi na yung butterflies because it's already reaction of your stomach, no? Because due to anxiety probably, and also the fight or flight situation. Next, tears, of course. Sometimes, no, before they say that crying is for sadness, but actually it is only a physical response, no? Sometimes you might be happy, but you are tearing, no? You are having tears in your eyes, and that's why doon pumasok si emotion as subjective experience. Now, next, the hyperventilation, no? Sometimes how we have this difficulty in breathing, no? Like inahapo tayo, no? And that sometimes results to the abnormal cycle of breathing may lead to the abnormal circulation of the blood in the body, kaya lumitigas yung ating katawan minsan. Next, emotion as behavioral response. And at this point, it is the actual expression of emotion. And the person's ability to understand this expression is accurately tied to what psychologists call emotional intelligence, no? Or EI, or EQ, emotional quotient. So, in this point, it is somehow how the person see and act and react in a certain situation because it is an expression of emotion. So it is the emotion as a behavioral response, and that's where the expressions can be universal, but we have to consider also cultural rules which makes emotional expression subjective, no? Kaya in this cycle dito cycle yung emotion as a subjective experience, emotion as a physiological response, and also emotion as a behavioral response. So, they are interrelated with each other. So, kanina, na-mention ko that there comes the difference between emotion and feeling. So, in this slide, I'm going to discuss to you the difference versus between the two, no? Emotion versus feelings. So, when we say emotion, it involves psychological expressions and biological reactions and mental states. And the feelings comes from the verb feel, no? It is an experience derived from the basic senses, from sensing to feeling, and that's from touching, smelling, tasting, and so on and so forth. So, however, due to the evolution of words, no, feelings are also now used to describe conscious and subjective experience. So, this means that feelings describe the emotions displayed by the individual. But don't be confused with these two because these are somehow different but somehow also related with each other. So, let's go on to the theories of emotion. So, first theory that we're going to discuss is the James Lang theory of emotion. No? This is proposed by the psychologist William James and physiologist Carl Lang. So, according to this theory, no, it's an external stimulus will lead to biological reaction, of course. That is external stimuli or external stimulus. And thus, emotion is dependent on how the brain interprets the physical reactions. So, the brain interprets the physical reaction and bring to consciousness and conclusion of fear. I am trembling, therefore I am afraid. So, ayan. So, from physical to emotional response, to subjective response, no, where the brain interprets and concludes, no, the physical reaction. So, if you are trembling, of course, therefore I am afraid. So, that's one of the example. And, for example, I am having this I am having chills in my hand, and of course, or sweating, of course, it is interpreted to be somebody who are anxious. Next, the Cannon-Bard theory of emotion. No? It is developed by Walter Cannon and also Philip Bard. So this asserts that the people feel emotions and experience physical reactions such as sweating, trembling, and muscle tension. So all at the same time. However, they are not part of one's emotions. So more specifically, this theory suggests that in this process of responding to a stimulus, the thalamus sends us a message to the brain that resulted to a series of biochemical reactions, no? And it is then that these reactions form to make a person's emotions. So for example, I see a snake, so therefore I begin to tremble, thus I am afraid. So that's how the process of Cannon-Bard's theory of emotion. Next, Shatter and Singer cognitive theory. So they suggest that physiological stimulation occurs first, and then the individual attempts to identify the reason behind the physiological stimulation, and after which the experience be labeled as emotion. So they, if to put it into a very simple sense, there will be always be a stimulus for their theory, and that the stimulus will create a reaction, no, to that certain stimulus. That's why they say it as a physiological stimulation which occurs first, and then the individual attempts to identify, no, the reason behind the physiological stimulation. So the experience itself is called the emotion. So it is also known as the two-factor theory of emotion and a cognitive theory of emotion. So the two-factor theory centers on the interaction between physical stimulus and the process of consciously identifying the stimulus. So in other words, simple feeling is not enough, and a person must also identify the reason in order to feel the emotion. So reason for the emotion, and the emotion is stimulated by physical stimulus. So in summary of these emotional theories, look at the table, no? So for James Lang theory, it can be said that the physical reactions and behavior cause the emotion, no? Physical reactions. Next, for the Cannon-Bard theory, the physical reaction and behavior are separate from emotion. And the next one, to Shatter and Singer, or the two-factor theory, events are interpreted to identify the meaning of physical reaction. So these are the summary, or these are the differences between, no, of these different theories in a gist. So as you can see here in the next slide, for more information, you may watch the following links I have provided here in the link above, in this background or in this slide. And thank you everyone, no, for listening to my video lecture. I hope that you have learned something today. Thank you, and God bless you all. So these are the reference for our video lecture. Thank you, and see you next week.